That spring night, the air felt crisp and easy, with a soft wind nudging the tree branches around in the garden. The sun had dipped below the horizon already, but a warm orange hue still clung to the edges of the sky. I stretched my legs out long, kicked back in that creaky old wooden chair, and poured myself a glass of Mullen 18-year-old whiskey on the rocks. Then came this sharp, jagged sound, like metal ripping apart, cutting through the quiet, and I took a slow sip, letting the icy burn trickle down my throat. That little slice of peace, just me and Amelia soaking in the stillness, was always our favorite part of the day. But something was off with Amelia that night. Her eyes weren't drifting out over the view like they usually did. She kept picking at the edge of her dress with twitchy fingers, dodging my gaze whenever I glanced her way. I clocked it right off, but figured she was just worn out, so I let it slide. Time ticked by, and she still couldn't settle down. The way she held herself, tense, like a coiled spring, told me this wasn't just another lazy evening. I peeked down at the can in my grip, a tight twist starting to churn in my gut. This weird, gnawing dread grabbed hold of me, whispering that our quiet little bubble was about to pop. Finally, Amelia sucked in a big breath and let it out slow. "I've got something to say," she said, her voice steady but heavy with something I couldn't pin down. "All right, spit it out," I shot back, doing my best to mask the nerves creeping up on me. She paused, like she was fishing for the perfect words, or maybe just working up the guts to let them loose. I sat there, waiting, every second dragging on like it was stuck in molasses. Then she locked eyes with me and dropped it flat out, "No sugarcoating, I've fallen for somebody else." I didn't budge. Didn't even blink. Hell, I'm pretty sure I forgot how to breathe. Her words hit me like a clap of thunder, rumbling around inside my skull. Everything just stopped. The soft rustle of the leaves faded off somewhere far away, the sky's glow turned dull and gray, and that whiskey taste in my mouth went flat as tap water. My chest squeezed tight, like the world had been jerked out from under me. "What did you say?" I croaked, barely recognizing the sound of my own voice. "There's someone I met," she said, not a waver in her tone. No shame, no second guessing. I let out this dry, hollow chuckle, half hoping she'd laugh too and call it a bad joke, but her stare didn't flinch, solid as a rock. "You're messing with me, right? This some kind of gag?" She sighed and turned her head away. "No, Caleb, it's real." I wrestled with this a long time before opening my mouth. That's when it hit me, this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment thing. Not a little hiccup we'd get past. Not a slip-up she'd take back. "How long's this been going on?" I asked, my voice dipping lower than I meant it to. She stalled for a second, and that silence said more than words ever could. "Does that even matter?" she tossed back. My chest lit up with this hot mix of rage and shock. Damn right it mattered. How could she act like it didn't? "You're telling me you've been stepping out on me, how's that not a big deal?" "It wasn't like that," she fired back, finally sounding a little rattled. "It was just, this thing that built up inside me, something I couldn't shove down." I dragged a hand across my face, trying to wrap my head around it all. My marriage, the one thing I'd always figured was bulletproof, was crumbling right in front of me, and I was the only one who hadn't seen it coming. A thick, suffocating quiet dropped between us. Amelia tilted her head up toward the pitch-black sky and muttered, "I never meant for it to go down like this." I laughed again, but it was bitter, empty. "Didn't mean to." "Then why the hell did you let it happen?" She faltered, and when she spoke again, her voice had this cold edge I wasn't ready for. "Because I don't love you anymore." That one landed like a sledgehammer. This dull, aching pressure spread through my chest, like somebody was wringing my heart out. I opened my mouth to fight back, to tell her she was dead wrong, that this was crazy, but deep down, I knew no amount of talking was gonna turn her around. Amelia had made her call, and I was stuck swallowing it. Morning rolled in like a sucker punch. I woke up to sunlight blasting through the bedroom window, my eyes gritty and my head pounding like a drum. Amelia's side of the bed. Empty. The sheet was smooth as glass, like she'd never even been there. For a split second, I let myself think it was all just a nightmare, but then I scanned the room, and the truth crashed down on me like a ton of bricks. Her closet door hung open, nothing inside. No dresses swaying on hangers, no shoes lined up, no little piles of junk that always seemed to spill out of her drawers. All that was left was this faint whiff of her perfume hanging in the air, already starting to drift away. I hauled myself up, this heavy weight pressing on my chest, and shuffled to the kitchen. The silence screamed in my ears. The house felt huge, hollow, like it had lost its soul overnight. There was this lone, pale envelope sitting smack in the middle of the table. I stopped dead in my tracks, eyeing it for a good few seconds before I finally snatched it up with shaky hands and tore it open. Inside, I found a fat stack of papers, divorce papers, all drawn up nice and neat. No note, no, sorry about this, not even a hint of explanation, just cold, official forms staring back at me, waiting for my John Hancock. My blood started simmering. Getting stabbed in the back was bad enough, but the way Amelia played it, like our marriage was just some paperwork to shred, no nod to all the years we'd put in, that cut deeper than anything. I balled up my fists, trying to choke down the fury bubbling up inside. Then my phone started buzzing like crazy, yanking me out of my head. I peeked at the screen, some random number I didn't know. I answered it with zero enthusiasm. "Yeah, this Mr. Reynolds," came this crisp, businesslike woman's voice. "I'm with Mrs. Amelia Reynolds's attorney's office. Just a heads up, the divorce papers are at your place, and we'd like to get a time locked in for you to sign them ASAP." That icy tone was the final kick in the teeth. Amelia couldn't even give it a day before she had her people hounding me to wrap it up. I clenched my jaw tight. I was too drained to pick a fight, so I just muttered, "I'll swing by later today." Didn't even wait for her to reply, just hung up and chucked the phone onto the table. I sucked in a long breath, trying to settle the chaos swirling in my chest. No way around it, I had to suck it up, take care of this last bit, and put it all behind me. A few hours later, I rolled up to the law firm. The place was stark, white walls, dark wood furniture, real no-nonsense vibes. The air smelled like stale coffee mixed with dusty old files. Amelia was already there, perched at the conference table, looking like she'd just stepped out of a magazine, perfect outfit, hair on point. She sat there cool as a cucumber, like none of this had rattled her cage one bit. Seeing her so unbothered, like our whole life together was nothing to her, left this sick, hollow ache in my gut. Across the table, the lawyers were all set to roll. My guy, Connor, was thumbing through the papers already. I plopped down in a chair without saying a word. "Let's make this quick," Amelia's lawyer said, shoving the stack my way. "Couple signatures, and we're done here." I grabbed the pen, ready to scratch my name down, but Connor tapped my shoulder and leaned in close, whispering, "Hold up a sec." I shot him a puzzled look. "What's up?" He flipped through the pages fast, then tugged me aside, dropping his voice low. "Something's weird with this deal. Amelia's basically handing you most of the stuff." I went stiff. "Wait, what are you saying? That mountain cabin of yours? It's staying with you," he explained. I scrunched my face up. "That beat-up old place?" Connor cracked a little grin. "Yeah, well, when you called me this morning, I skimmed the contract and your assets. Didn't dig too deep then, but that cabin's worth a fortune now, millions." I blinked at him, totally thrown. "But it's just some rickety shack." "Sure, except they greenlit a ski resort right next door, and the whole area's value shot through the roof," he said. "How'd you figure that out?" Connor folded his arms, looking pretty smug. "'Cause the guy building that resort? He's my client. You lucked out big time, millionaire status, and Amelia doesn't even know she screwed herself giving you that old cabin. My heart started thumping hard. I glanced over at Amelia, tapping her fingers on the armrest like she couldn't wait to bolt. She had no idea she'd fumbled the bag. A mess of feelings hit me all at once. Part of me wanted to shove it in her face, let her know her rush to ditch me just cost her everything she was probably after. But another part. I kinda liked the idea of keeping it quiet, letting it ride. I tightened my grip on the pen, took a deep breath, and looked at Connor. Let's just sign it and be done. The pen glided over the paper, locking in my choice. Amelia sat there, stone-faced, not a flicker of feeling on her. The second I finished the last signature, she snatched her copy of the papers and marched out the door without so much as a goodbye. I stayed put for a minute, staring at the empty spot across from me. And then, out of nowhere, I felt something I didn't think I'd feel this soon, a little taste of freedom. I stepped out of the law firm, the ink from my signature still feeling heavy on my hands. The late afternoon sun was dipping low, splashing the sky with orange streaks that didn't do a damn thing to fill the hollow spot inside me. You'd think I'd be raging or relieved, something big, but all I got was this weird, dead numbness. My marriage was done, kaput. Amelia had strutted off without so much as a glance over her shoulder, and for the first time in forever, I was on my own, just me and the wide-open nothing. I didn't have a plan, so I just started walking, drifting through the streets like a ghost, seeing the city in a way I hadn't in years. Car horns blared, folks laughed as they spilled out of coffee joints, and the breeze tugged at shop awnings. It was all happening around me, but I felt like some outsider, just watching my own life roll by. Next thing I knew, I was standing in front of this little hole-in-the-wall bar. Its neon sign buzzed and flickered, throwing off a bluish glow, the Rusty Nail. Used to hit that place all the time, back before Amelia had me stuck at swanky dinners and boring-ass parties. I shuffled inside without thinking twice. The smell of worn wood and whiskey slammed into me, and somehow, it felt like a warm hug. I grabbed a stool at the bar and gave a lazy wave to the bartender, this middle-aged guy with a face that said he'd seen it all. "The usual?" he asked, squinting like he remembered me. I opened my mouth to answer but stopped cold. The usual? What the hell did that even mean anymore? Just pour me a double whiskey, neat. He slid the glass my way, and I took a slow pull, letting the heat sear down my throat. I shut my eyes for a sec, soaking in how the drink quieted the noise in my head. Then this woman's voice piped up next to me. "Guess you're joining the Broken Hearts Club, huh?" I swiveled my head and spotted her a couple stools down, cradling a glass of red wine. Her blonde hair was tossed up in a kinda sloppy bun, and her eyes, sharp, like they'd seen a lifetime, held stories I couldn't even guess at. Grace Carter. I knew her face right off. She'd been the assistant attorney at Amelia's firm during the divorce mess. Always came off stiff and buttoned up there, but here in this dive bar, she seemed different, more human. "You throwing a divorce party too?" I asked, forcing a half smile. "Party's not quite it," she said, twirling her glass so the wine danced inside. "It's been 2 years since I put my name on those papers. Went smooth, no fights, no big blowouts. Still, when it was done, it felt like someone carved a chunk out of me." She paused, then added, "First it was like I'd busted out of jail. Then I figured out I had no clue what to do with the keys." I leaned in a little, hooked. "So what about now? You got it all sorted?" She arched an eyebrow, took a sip of her wine, then said, "Not yet, but I'm having a hell of a time figuring it out." Something about how she talked pulled me in, not just her straight shooting style, but how she didn't shy away from showing her cracks. And for the first time since Amelia bailed, my brain wasn't stuck looping on her. We ended up yakking for hours. The drinks greased the wheels, and the words just poured out easy. Grace didn't mess around with small talk, and I dug that. She laid out her take on life with this raw, no-filter edge, not scared to say she was sometimes just winging it. At one point, she cracked up at some dumb thing I said, and her laugh was so real it dragged a grin out of me, first one I'd cracked in days. Time flew by, and we didn't even notice. The bar cleared out, but we kept at it, wrapped up in our little world, until out of nowhere, Grace leaned my way. Her eyes darted from my mouth to somewhere in her own head. I saw it coming and froze for a heartbeat, not sure what to do. Then she kissed me. It was slow, no rush, like a mix of something I knew and something brand new crashing together. I kissed her back, but then eased off an inch, staring at her, half stunned, half lost. I was hitched, till, like, 5 hours ago. She gave me this tiny smile, no hint of awkwardness. And now you're not. I sucked in a breath, glancing at her half-empty glass. This your move with every fresh divorcee? She laughed, shaking her head. You're not on my client list anymore. We went quiet, just looking at each other, trying to suss out what this was gonna turn into. But for once, I didn't give a damn about tomorrow. I grabbed my glass and lifted it up in a spur-of-the-moment toast. Here's to whatever's next. Grace raised hers, clinking it against mine. To whatever's next. That night, for the first time in a long stretch, I started thinking there might be something waiting for me past all this wreckage. Morning crept in, sunlight sneaking through the curtains and throwing soft shadows across the living room floor. I cracked my eyes open slow, the hangover from last night still kicking around in my skull. I rubbed a hand over my face, trying to shake the fog, and then I saw them, the divorce papers, sprawled out across the table like a messy reminder. I scooped up those divorce papers and started thumbing through them, taking my time with it now. The split was pretty even, Amelia got her cut, I kept mine, no nasty brawls or drawn-out yelling matches, just a clean break. Then my eyes snagged on something I'd glossed over before, that old cabin up in the mountains. Amelia couldn't stand the place. She'd always griped about how cut off it felt, how dead quiet it was, how it didn't have a shred of comfort. Never bothered hiding how pointless she thought it was. We hadn't set foot there in years because of it. So when it came down to it, she ditched the cabin like it was some beat-up old junk she couldn't wait to toss. I sat there, staring at the page, this weird, twitchy feeling creeping up in my chest. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and punched Connor's number. It rang twice before he picked up. Hey, Connor, we gotta talk about that cabin, I said, squeezing the phone like it might slip away. His voice came through steady as ever, but what he laid out next had my pulse hammering. Caleb, you remember what I said the day you signed those papers? That cabin might look like nothing, but the land, I scrunched my face, trying to connect the dots. What about the land? There was a quick beat of silence before he dropped the bomb that flipped everything upside down. Like I told you, they're putting up a ski resort right next door. Big-time luxury hotels are already snagging up chunks of the area for their projects. Your spot's massive and smack in the middle of it all. It's worth at least $10 million. The room around me went dead still. I blinked hard, trying to let it sink in. How much you say? My voice came out quiet, almost shaky. At least 10 million. Could be more. A chill zipped down my back. I glanced at the divorce papers sprawled on the table, thinking about how Amelia had shrugged off that cabin like it was trash. She figured it was worthless, something to chuck without a care. But she'd tossed away a goldmine. I gripped the phone harder, a slow grin tugging at my mouth. Connor, please tell me you've already got a buyer lined up. The next few months were a blur, like something out of a movie. Word about the area's big investments spread like wildfire, and before long, heavy-hitting hotel chains started throwing offers at me. After some smart back and forth, I locked in a deal with this global resort outfit. Final price tag, $12 million. 12 million. I can still picture the second I signed that contract. Their lawyer stuck out his hand with a grin, and I shook it, half in a daze, like I couldn't believe it was real. So there I was, not just free from a busted marriage, but sitting on a pile of cash. And maybe the best part? I wasn't riding solo anymore. Grace was right there with me. What kicked off as a barstool chat and a surprise kiss had turned into something solid. We started hanging out regular-like, and as the months rolled on, we just clicked deeper. When that land deal went official, I looked over at Grace and knew exactly what I wanted to do with all that dough. Fancy houses? Nah. Tricky stock plays? Pass. Anything that'd chain me down? No thanks. I wanted to live, plain and simple. So I didn't even blink before deciding, a whole year bouncing around the world with Grace. Paris, Rome, Tokyo, Sydney, spots I'd always daydreamed about but never carved out time to see. They weren't just pipe dreams anymore, they were the next pages in this new life I was finally getting right. The plane lifted off for our first stop, and I stared out the window with a grin plastered on my face. The past was dust in my rear view, the future was wide open, and for once, I was smack where I wanted to be. A while later, there I was, parked at a little seaside joint, sipping wine and watching Grace crack up at some quip the waiter tossed her way. We were in Greece, one of a dozen places we'd hit over the past few months. Life felt easy, like a weight I didn't even know I'd been hauling had lifted. No stress, no headaches, no dead marriage anchoring me to something long gone. Right then, my phone gave a little buzz. I glanced down and saw a text from one of my buddies light up the screen. "Man, you're not gonna believe this, Amelia dumped that college punk." Word is, he stepped out on her with some younger chick. I let out a quiet laugh, shaking my head at the sheer absurdity of it. The whole thing was almost too rich. Here she was, tossing our rock-solid marriage for some fling she swore was the real deal, only to get a dose of her own betrayal in return. I slid the phone back down and looked over at Grace, who was giving me this curious sideways glance. "Something bad?" she asked, one eyebrow quirking up. I cracked a little grin. "Nah, just life spinning its usual crazy wheel." I let it go at that, shifting my focus back to her in the moment we were in. A few weeks later, though, the past came knocking, literally. We'd swung back home for a quick visit, just to catch up with some folks before our next adventure. I was stepping out of a coffee shop, sipping on a latte, when I heard this voice I knew too well calling my name. I turned around, and there she was, right on the sidewalk, Amelia. She had sunglasses perched on her nose, but even so, I could tell her face looked tighter, a little more weathered than it used to be. Something about her had shifted, it wasn't that cocky edge anymore, but this shaky kind of doubt. "We gotta talk," she said, her tone wobbling between fragile and trying to hold it together. I crossed my arms over my chest. "Yeah. What about?" She sucked in a big breath before letting it rip. "I screwed up, Caleb. I know I blew it with you. I let go of something real, 'cause I thought I had it all figured out, but I was dead wrong." I just stood there, watching her spill, not cutting in. "I'm late to the game, I get that, but I can see you're not the same guy anymore. Your whole life's different now." I knew she'd probably caught wind I was loaded now, though she didn't have a clue why. Maybe she figured I'd lucked into some inheritance or hit it big on a wild stock bet. She had no idea about the cabin, how she'd waved it off like it was nothing, never guessing it was the golden ticket she'd handed me without a blink. Her voice started quivering as she pressed on. "I've been thinking, maybe there's still a shot for us, a way to hit reset. I don't want what we had to just fizzle out like this." I studied her for a long stretch, soaking in every little twitch on her face. Once upon a time, those words would have been everything I'd prayed to hear. But now, they were just noise. I stepped back, letting out this calm, easy breath. "Amelia, I'm past it." Her eyes popped wide for a second, like that was the last thing she'd braced for. "Caleb," she started, but I shook my head, a faint smile tugging at my mouth. "You take care, all right?" Then I turned and walked off, not even tempted to glance back.